Return to Castle Wolfenstein Operation Resurrection is a sort of pseudo-souped-up port of the 2001 PC release, simply titled Return to Castle Wolfenstein. The original campaign was developed for the computer by Grey Matter Interactive, and features series mainstay B.J. Blazkowicz as he, returns to Castle Wolfenstein to obliterate gaggle after gaggle of goose-steppin' Nazi scum. There's a bit more to it than all of that, but honestly, does it really matter? This is a Wolfenstein game, and the reason I've stuck with the series for all of these years is due to the tight, fun gameplay. The historical stuff? Icing on the cake. The sci-fi elements always captivated me. BJ's adventures felt like rated R Indiana Jones romps, grounded just enough with sprinkles of realism to keep me invested.
Finger on the trigger. That's right.
Hey, the new Colossus, maybe you overdid it there a bit, chum. Just a bit. I was a big fan of all things Wolfenstein, before they jumped the shark in the new Colossus. I was a young teen in 1992 when Wolfenstein 3D dropped. The first time I played it was on my grandfather's PC. He taught me how to load it up, and I promised not to tell my German grandmother that it even existed. She had lost a lot of family during and after the war, so it added a new level of very real risk when it came to playing this game. It had to be in secret. The levels of violence and Nazi imagery, all in the first person's perspective, made it something new. Inappropriate even. I'd hunker down in that basement bunker with the volume super low, hunting down waves of Nazis with one eye on the stairs, making sure my grandmother wasn't coming down to check on me or the laundry. Wolfenstein was an experience for me, man. Not only was it the first 3D shooter I had ever played, but it also helped me create a real bond with my grandfather. Wolfenstein 3D is just one of those things. It's a nostalgic coat rack that I hang a lot of memories on. The gruesome visuals were there, sure, the first-person perspective, yeah. But it also opened up my mind. I wanted to hear about the lives of my grandparents. This all sounds a bit crazy, but it made me want to learn about the war. Then I started reading about other wars and even more wars. And it turned me into an active reader of non-fiction, specifically stories about, wars, societies, and religions. As silly as this may sound, I kind of trace all of this back to those days as a kid playing Wolfenstein in that basement. For such a silly little video game, it conjured up some big thoughts and interests for me. It had the same feel as an Indiana Jones film, but somehow felt less campy. Every subsequent Wolfenstein release was an event for me. Unfortunately, I'd have to wait years before a proper sequel. Yeah, sure, there were additions to Wolfenstein 3D, but they were kind of unimpressive, in my opinion. A lot of corridors and maze-like structures. It were focused on other projects, such as Doom, and eventually Quake, but I never forgot about their first foray into the 3D realm. Not by a long shot. Return to Castle Wolfenstein was a day one purchase for me back in the day. It was as over-the-top and gory as it was gritty. The realistic-looking textures and environments had me hooked immediately, and the tight gameplay kept me coming back for more. Unfortunately, there is no footage of it here for this review. These days, I don't have a means of playing it since my physical copy won't work on my modern PC, and the Steam version won't boot on my rig. If you have any pointers or links to help guide me through the process of getting it to work on Windows 10, please post in the comments. This PS2 version not only lengthens the existing mouthful of a name, but it also contains a brand new substantial opening sequence, not present in the original. On top of that, it deviates quite a bit from the PC game in more than a handful of ways, mostly for the better, and always to make it a controller-friendly experience.
You wanted to see me, Major?
Captain Blazkowicz, come in. You've been reassigned. The OSA has a top-secret mission, and they think you're the right man.
Return to Castle Wolfenstein is one of my favorite first-person shooters, and I resisted buying it on the PS2 because, well, controls kinda sucked back then for console games. Nowadays, FPSs share similar mechanics, but back in the PS1 and PS2 era, developers didn't seem to know how to map the controls in a comfortable way. TBC and Activision pretty much hit this one out of the park, though. Operation Resurrection is a phenomenal game that I enjoy almost as much as the original. The controls aren't perfect, but the auto-aim certainly helps. If I had to compare the way it feels to anything, it would have to be GoldenEye on the N64. It's snappy and tight, but it allows a lot of wiggle room with the aiming, making it a pretty forgiving console FPS. A controller is no replacement for a keyboard and mouse, but I credit the developers for finding a scheme that works. Simply put, it's the most fun I've had playing a console shooter from this era. I played through this thing 3 times capturing footage because damn man, there's a lot to enjoy here, and even more to unpack in subsequent playthroughs. The combat is challenging, the pace is superb, and the secrets are well hidden. Not only well hidden, but also pretty crucial to uncover, because they offer up long-term perks to your playable character. Uncovering these rooms and treasures rarely gets boring throughout the lengthy campaign, either. Some secrets are hidden behind switches, others require the smashing of a particular wall, and a few even require some puzzle solving. It's great, and searching through old European catacombs and castles makes you feel like a real Indiana Jones type of badass. I know I keep saying Indiana Jones. Count how many times I say it, it's going to be at least half a dozen here. The visuals lack the terrific textures and dynamic lighting of the original, but for a PlayStation 2 alternative, it gets the job done. Though I would definitely recommend turning the brightness all the way up, because frankly, the stock setting is way too dark. Even on a CRT, it was tough to make out the environments, let alone the enemies, so yeah, before you get started, go ahead and crank that sucker up to the max. When the original Return to Castle Wolfenstein dropped in 2001, Half-Life already existed and the first Halo was out a week before. In other words, by the time this 2003 PlayStation 2 version launched, it was already overshadowed by games that took the FPS genre in bolder directions. That being said, Return to Castle Wolfenstein doesn't feel dated, just a lot more traditional. Maps are a bit more dense, the combat is simpler, and there aren't as many stage gimmicks as other games at the time. I've always preferred these kinds of experiences over the grander first-person shooters, so it felt refreshing, especially all of these years later, but I can definitely understand how some people might feel a bit underwhelmed. Return to Castle Wolfenstein isn't flashy. It feels like a great classic film, whereas a lot of newer FPS games follow the formula of modern action films. More shit, bigger set pieces, no restraint. It's also not perfect. The camera is largely fine, but combat can feel a bit jittery at times, specifically when BJ is ascending or descending stairs. Also, the enemy AI is a bit inconsistent. It ranges from highly intelligent to downright stupid, with tiny swaths of spastic jank tossed in for good measure. Like, sometimes I'd boot up a level and be precision killed in no time by a long-range rifle from the shadows, only to die, try again, and see that same enemy doing a pirouette, then walking away. I do like how the baddies move around quite a bit in the environments, as it keeps every attempt fresh, but their movements are a bit tricky to anticipate at times. Inconsistent, even. In the PC release, kneeling would steady the player's aim, making it easier to pop off headshots. Operation Resurrection completely omitted this mechanic. It's kind of confusing too, as it made the combat feel a lot more complex. I'm not sure if this was intentional or an oversight, but it definitely changes the way I played through the stages, and not necessarily for the better. Something that is prevalent across all versions of Return to Castle Wolfenstein is the shoddy grenade tossing mechanic. Maybe it's just me, but after all of these years, I still can't get the hang of throwing these things. The arc is pretty abysmal, my aiming is shit, and when I can get one out, it bounces all over the damn place. This one is probably the most subjective of my complaints by far, and forces me to only use the grenades as a last resort. There are tons of weapons for BJ to collect, and like most classic FPS games, there is no limit to how many he can keep on his person. I can't think of a game that requires a weapon wheel more than this one. Guns, knives, grenades, oh my, they need to be cycled through manually, which oftentimes makes it a big problem in dire situations. I think for this console version, a few of them could have been eliminated to keep the pace of the action up. 2 face buttons are used to scroll through this large arsenal, and it takes a bit of skill to manage everything successfully. Leaning around corners is an option, but for whatever reason you can't shoot from this position, making it a bit pointless if you ask me. Like I said earlier, this is a traditional FPS, so health regeneration isn't a thing. Thank Christ. You'll actually need to be skillful and exercise a bit of caution throughout this game's many missions, because it definitely gets challenging, even on the standard difficulty. There are med packs, plates of warm or cold food, and bottles of wine lying around, but after the first few stages, these replenishing resources are almost non-existent. I'm all for challenge, but a lot of the late game enemies are bullet sponges who deliver massive amounts of damage, so the limited health items feels a tad unnecessarily cheap. The good thing is that you can save at any time, which is absolutely necessary to remember due to the lack of checkpoints. Save. Remember to save, because some stages can be downright painful to replay. They are cut down in length from the PC version, but some sequences can be a bit unbalanced and cruel, so, again, save. The health might be sparse and it doesn't refill between stages, but the ammo drops are just right. Operation Resurrection does an excellent job giving the player exactly what they need at just the right time. You'll still need to be careful and not Rambo it all the way, but it's fair if you show some restraint and plan ahead. There are 3 bosses, and they're just sorta alright. They are all accompanied by lesser minions and mostly devolve into repetitive patterns. That is all but the super soldier, who can be a bit of a pain if you don't know where to stand. It feels a bit cheap, and having lesser bads join in any boss fight just screams lazy to me in any game.
All right, gentlemen. Now let's go through it again by the numbers. What did we miss?
Well, here's what we know.
The plot for Return to Castle Wolfenstein is pretty basic. BJ needs stop Nazi bad bads. There are some interesting, albeit overly lengthy, expository cinematic pieces set inside an office. These actually look a bit better than the uninspired ones from the PC version. As I briefly mentioned earlier, Operation Resurrection has a pretty substantial intro not present in the original, set in Egypt. The first section feels like a tacked-on tutorial, but things start picking up the pace quickly. It's an extremely satisfying addition that leads to a plane crash, resulting in BJ's capture. As far as I know, there hasn't been a fan-made patch of these stages for the PC, which is a real shame, because they fit in quite well with the core game, and work to set up our main antagonists. The puzzles and secrets, as well as the stage designs for these Egyptian missions, are on par with the rest of the experience. Great job! Oh, and BJ actually speaks in this new prelude, which is notable only because he has no lines of dialogue in the original.
The Nazis are concentrated around the command post in the center of town, here. And the ruins on the outskirts, here. Helga has to be in one of those locations. We'll cover more ground if we split up.
Agreed. I'll take the command post and leave the archaeology to you.
Remember, our primary objective is to locate and capture von Bülow. Alerting the guards to our presence may jeopardize this mission. Right, let's move out.
All of the stages are interesting, varied, and fairly straightforward. Your typical Wolfenstein corridor missions are all here, but there are some new, cleverer, intricate vertical designs tossed in, with some large, open areas as well. These bigger set pieces are fun to explore, but the draw distance can get quite muddy and short. There are some stealth sequences, but they aren't nearly as frustrating or as unforgiving as those from its PC counterpart. Overall, the stages, secrets, and enemy placements are thoughtfully designed and pretty perfect. The pace of the game will have you wanting to play more, and the secrets alone will have you wanting to revisit this one over and over again. One of the things that keeps me coming back for more is the damn near orgasmic sounds that the weapons make. The gun audio is meaty, loud, and crisp. Reloading a weapon is just as sexy with a lot of heavy, chunky sounds and terrific animations. All of the baddies across the board sound good, but the zombies and mummies really stand out. In the catacombs, crypts, and caves, the groans these undead creatures make are enough to give you chills. Often their bellows will eerily permeate these environments, making exploration feel like something out of a horror game. The only audio complaint that I have is that all of the Nazis sound like English actors doing poor German impressions. Coming from a family where I would hear the language a lot, it's downright comical how broad and silly these accents sound. Surely it wouldn't have taken very much work to get some real German voice actors. It's a real shame that it was handled so poorly, considering the amount of effort that went into setting a dark tone with the environments and story. It just kind of takes the wind out of the sails a bit.
You'll break the inner seal.
I'm prepared to take that risk.
You're prepared. Are you completely mad?
Multiplayer was, and as far as I can see, still is a major component when it comes to the PC version, but on the PS2, nada. It's just not an option. To be honest, it really doesn't bother me. Playing with and against others online was great fun in the original. As a matter of fact, it was a huge, well-crafted draw, but it wouldn't have been as good on a console from this era. I can see how this could turn some people off, but I'm fine with replaying this solid campaign over and over. The music in Operation Resurrection is also pretty great, with a couple of arrangements that sound like beefed up versions of tracks that could have been in the original Wolfenstein 3D titles. There are a few new pieces composed specifically for this PS2 game, including a new opening tune that sounds like something taken from an 80s sci-fi action flick. Operation Resurrection is a fairly lengthy experience, and there are only a few pieces of in-game music that repeat over and over. So all in all, the soundtrack does its job without ever sounding intrusive. The music swells when it needs to punctuate a particular moment and never distracts from the gameplay or atmosphere. There's just not a lot of it. I've mentioned the secret areas a few times by this point and the leveling up mechanic briefly, so let's dig into that a bit more now. Indiana Jones, hidden trinkets and rooms were a big part of the Wolfenstein 3D experience, and boy, howdy are they back. So in the PC version of Return to Castle Wolfenstein, you basically found these things and that was that. In Operation Resurrection, each of these secrets grant the player a point to use in between stages. Basically, these act as credits that can be collected to buy perks, such as health, armor, and ammo upgrades. It's definitely an improvement over the original system as it gives the player incentive to find all of the secrets. The developers clearly put a lot of time into hiding these too, with some being locked behind obtuse puzzles. A lot of these areas are fun to find on their own and really make Operation Resurrection feel like a complete package. It's probably clear by now just how much I enjoy this game. It's my favorite entry in the series by a long shot. While writing this review, all I could think about was laying waste to more Nazis and adventuring through Castle Wolfenstein again. There is really nothing else like it on the PS2, and my only regret is that I hadn't played this console version sooner. It's a must-play for fans of first-person shooters, and I'd urge those who have only played the admittedly superior PC game to give this one a shot as well. It really is its own thing, and aside from the textures, draw distances, and aiming, I think it could be argued that this console port feels like a more fleshed-out experience. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention the Xbox game entitled Tides of War. Playing through Operation Resurrection made me interested in checking that one out as well. I just bought it but have yet to dig in, so that review will have to wait. I'm very interested in seeing the changes that one brings to the core experience. Until then, grab yourself a copy of this PS2 classic and let me know what you think. There really is no better time to return to Castle Wolfenstein.